Ready to rock and roll?
Yeah, are you done yelling at me?
We'll see. We still got a whole show to do.
Guess what? I got a fever.
You give me fever, fever in the morning, a fever all through the night.
Okay, folks, welcome to Dynasty Fever Podcast, episode 78. The Gary Putz, Barry Bennett episode, if you're keeping score with the Jets. Very nondescript. The people who make the list said that 78 is one of the worst numbers for the Jets. So who the hell cares? We're talking Dynasty Fantasy Football, particularly wide receivers. And it's good to say that in the beginning of the audio, because when you post it on YouTube algorithm will pick up the first few seconds of your audio and help categorize it. I'm Brian Ford, and I'm here with my co-host, as always, Jesse Schneeman. It's been a while. What's up? How you doing?
I'm doing good. This is the after episode, right?
What?
After you and I just argued about, we just did a whole Travis Etienne episode before we even pressed record.
Right. Well, I mean, listen, if you can't accept the new reality that Travis Etienne is one of the most overrated dynasty running backs, that's out. I mean, that's fine.
You're the chancellor of Narrative Village.
Well, I mean, okay, but I don't want to go down a Travis Etienne rabbit hole, but
you're the vicar of the Church of Narrative.
Narrative matters, especially in the offseason when you're speculating about what will happen next season, right?
But we're exceedingly bad at figuring out which one is really real and which one isn't. Really bad at that because they're all lying to us. I just don't know which lie.
I don't necessarily mean narrative based on a coach quote. I mean narrative based on what's the story I'm putting together with the data I have, because there is no stats yet. Right. The story I'm telling is one of X, Y, and Z about his value and the effect of Tank Bigsby and that sort of. But you know what? We talked about that in our post-draft winners and losers episodes that listeners can go.
I don't want to debate ATN, but I do want to place value on. Like, I would love to do one of the Matthew Berry segments where he just reads a bunch of stats, right? And can spin it both ways, you know what I mean? And then tells you who the player is afterwards, and you're like, yeah. And you're like, oh, but I really like that player. You know, it's you can narrative any player any way you want, but when you look at the numbers, I mean, in small
right, but you can also take
anyway. So it's really just comes down to like who you really like as a person. I'm kidding. I'm joking. That's really the only thing it doesn't come down to. Okay, go on.
All right, we're doing an episode on wide receivers. And, it's generally going to be about the idea that we have like a million gazillion wide receiver twos in Dynasty. But before we get into that, I just want to unpack like the position a little bit, because it's, in recent times, especially with, the new approach to running backs, which is, I think, the right approach. We're saying we're building our teams around wide receivers, right? Or part of like the build, right, is you want stud wide receivers before you add running backs. But since everybody's doing that now, and since running backs continue to decline in value, it is pushing some of these wide receivers far up in value and rankings and far up the draft board too. So for example, Jalen Waddle going off the board in a startup at wide receiver 6, I don't think is crazy, but maybe his ADP of a mid-second is, I think, a little inflated, right? Going in the same round as CMC and Breece Hall and,
that's crazy talk.
Ahead of Dak Prescott, in the same range as Deshaun Watson. This is all super flex, right? So it seems a little inflated to me.
He is you got to remind yourself, he is the wide receiver 2 on his team. And his production is more than a lot of guys around him prone to spikes and dips, so it's a wild ride with Waddle and Tyreek. I mean, you kind of have to look at him as like Tyreek Jr., Tyreek Light a little bit. I mean, I liked him when, you could pass on Tyreek and get Waddle a couple rounds later. I don't like him when it's like the same round. Or
Well, yeah,
actually, Waddle's going before Tyreek, right?
yeah. Now it's like a whole round ahead, right?
Yeah. So and I get the trepidation on Tyreek. I understand with his skill set. When it goes, and he's probably going to lose it all at once.
Mm-hmm. Possible suspension from this legal thing.
Right? Yeah. He's not a good person. It's obvious. He's always going to be in trouble for, I don't know, being a bad guy. So there's that, and the fact that he's already said that he wants to retire in a year and a half, 2 years. Mm-hmm. So whether he actually does or not, that's in other dynasty players' minds.
So is this changing at all the way that you're approaching wide receiver, the way that these guys are getting pushed up? Like, I don't know how much you're in the best ball streets, right? But like, it's crazy. Like underdog, like best ball, like the way people build, like it's wide receivers are just going off the board. And there's some math and some data that supports that, right? But like it's also happening everywhere because everybody's waking up to what's going on with running back. Should we approach the position any differently, or just is it more about now we just need to look for the values? So like, is Cooper Kupp underpriced? And so now he becomes a little bit more attractive, because he's a value play within this general milieu, this general environment of wide receiver inflation.
Well, this is a classic argument, right? And this goes all the way back. For me, it goes all the way back to the days of T.O. Back in those days, he was a guaranteed stud wide receiver that you knew you were going to get 15 touchdowns. You were going to get, stud running back numbers out of. And those were the days where you needed a stud running back. Everybody took running backs in round one of, one quarterback leagues. And then the idea started to creep in. Because I'm picking 10th, do I take the 10th running back or do I take the first wide receiver in TO? And I used to call it zagging, right? Do I zag when everybody's zig or whatever? And I only did it once and it didn't work out for me, but it doesn't mean it won't work out in the future. My whole point is, and it's gone back and forth, right? Are we overvaluing running backs? Are we undervaluing running backs? Are we over and back and forth? It's case by case. Look at the value of the player in front of you versus the players around them, right? Mm-hmm. It's really hard for me to characterize an entire position, when it just depends on who you're talking about, right? If you look at this year's rookie drafts, it doesn't feel to me at all that people were prioritizing wide receivers. Some people were taking Gibbs at 103.
Yeah.
And he was pretty much the 105. JSN didn't overtake him in a lot of drafts.
Well, I think what I would say to that is that that just means the elite running backs are that much more valuable.
Well, no. Well, yeah.
Because the rest of the position becomes flatter and more of a wasteland.
But then people were jumping at A-Chain and Charb and for the love of God, Kendre Miller for some reason, and jumping these guys up their boards when, I see a player like Roshan Johnson pretty similar. And, he was falling all the way. It just shows to me that people fall in love with running backs. They fall in love with running backs in situations, right? If you get the perfect fit for the perfect running back in people's eyes, I guess that's what Kendre Miller is, swollen knee and everything. They still will jump at them over wide receivers. So yeah, maybe it's swinging back a little bit, but wait till we get in season and it's, you're seeing running backs breaking off long runs or wait till Dalvin signs with Miami or something. You know what I mean? Once there's that fit or once there's the perception, I'm sorry, I'm losing myself a little bit, but my point is it goes back and forth, and it's really where the value is.
I think, yeah, and that's what it's about, right? It's about value. I think as we get closer to the season, these startups, the running backs will be a little bit more popular. I still think a slight disagreement in that I think I can generalize about a position versus another position, how to treat running back versus how to treat wide receiver. But in the end, it's still about finding the market inefficiencies. It's still about finding the value, right? So when people are overinflating like Waddle and Amon-Ra and maybe even to an extent Garrett Wilson still, right? Okay, let me take Breece Hall. Let me take CMC. Let me take, whatever, right? A quarterback in a super flex like Deshaun Watson or Dak Prescott. And then, rounds 7, 8, 9, I'm finding value in at the wide receiver position, right? Like, I mean, even earlier than that, like Stephon Diggs is like the 311, right? That's a whole round and a half after Amon-Ra. Like,
there's a really interesting juxtaposition this year where you have like younger wide receivers that haven't put up wide receiver 1 seasons well above stud wide receivers that are just older, right? You have a tier of, I guess, 3 of them with Kupp, Devontae, and Diggs.
And Kupp, Devontae, Diggs, and I would put Tyreek in there too as like the 4 old guys that are still holding.
Right, yeah.
But I'm a little scared about Devontae.
Arguably the top 4 wide receivers in fantasy football right now. Top 4 point scoring wide receivers. But, I know I have them all ranked in the teens, early teens. Yeah. But I don't have them ranked as the wide receiver ones that they are. It's kind of odd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I've struggled to justify it, to be honest with you. Earlier, I have Judy ranked 11, which I'm realizing is too high. I think I'm going to have to move him down. And I have Devontae Adams at like 14 or 15. I offered Judy for Adams earlier today. Somebody put Devontae Adams on the block, and I was like, well, I have other young wide receivers. Devontae Adams, if I'm going for it this year, helps me win over Judy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I got declined, and it was a Broncos fan, Mike Casper. Yeah. But it's just because he wanted 3 firsts in 5 seconds on top.
Yeah, Mike Casper doesn't make trades without squeezing all the blood out of you and your firstborn and a mortgage of your house and So
unless he really likes a guy, and then he'll overpay.
Yeah. And so then it's about finding the value in that pocket, right? So similar to you, I have those 4 guys in a tier of like 10 to 17, right? With Hill and Diggs being towards the top of that tier, Kupp and Devontae being towards the bottom of that tier. And I'm a little worried about Devontae. I don't know if I'm keeping him in that tier because of how the whole drama going on there, plus Jimmy G. There's just something about like the Raiders this year. I think it's just like going to be a cursed clusterfuck. But
you mean drama with with Jacobs, or is there something else I don't know?
With Jacobs, with him, he's been dissatisfied because they got rid of Carr, and there's some other thing going on. The news out of there is that he's divaing, right? So. I don't want to say divaing, right? Because maybe he's got legitimate gripes because McDaniels is a douche. But anyway, but if I was still more confident about him, it would be like, okay, let's take the the cheapest guy out of guys that I like relatively the same. Take Devontae Adams, whose ADP is I think 411 right now. Yeah, 411 is wide receiver 17, right? And that's 2 whole rounds after Waddle.
Yeah. Right.
And it's like that, and that speaks to you don't always trade and draft based on your rankings, right? Because that's just it's different. So wide receiver 2s, quote unquote. I always joke that there's like 75 million wide receiver 2s, right? And in Dynasty. And for me, it starts with like my 18th guy and goes to about like my 40th, right? Like there's 2 tiers in there. Right. But that tier break might be a little soft. It might just be one huge tier of guys that I definitely value the guys at the top of the tier higher than I value the guys at the bottom of the tier. But in the end, I can tell a story where a guy in the bottom of the tier could do, like, for example, Pittman and Ayuk are my 18 and 19 at the top of that, right? But at the bottom of that are like Dotson and Addison at 29 and 30, right? And then, further down, Christian Kirk and Quentin Johnson, right, in the 30s. So, like, I could totally see where, the guys that I'm valuing less right now wind up being, a better off, in 2023 and or beyond than the guys I'm valuing toward the top of that tier. And that's where I think it's a, I cannot stress enough value, right? So, like, what is the opportunity cost in a startup? And then in the trade streets, it's like, can you get a plus, right? So let me say, for example, I have Ayuk as my 19th wide receiver, right? I have Rashad Bateman as my 27th, right? But they're generally in the same tier. If someone gave me Bateman and like a second and a third or something for Ayuk, like, I'm going to take that, right? Like, because I value them, for me personally, close enough that if you're going to get the plus, right? Tier down, get the plus, tier down, get the plus, right? Not even really tearing down, just like, so and that may not be like for you that you would do that trade, but the point being, you have two wide receivers like that probably in your rankings,
Right?
Like, maybe your Debo at 20 and your Terry McLaurin at 27 or DJ Moore at 28. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, right. I have Ayuk at 22. Bateman I just put on the list, by the way, at 54, just below Mechie. So it would be a big plus.
I'm sorry, you have Rashad Bateman at 54?
No, I just kind of stuck him in there. I guess I'll put him in at 46. 46, right below Jacoby and Myers and above Alec Pierce.
Jesus Christ, I wish I was in a league with you. I could trade for Rashad Bateman.
Dude, that does not mean I'm going to trade. And that is the whole point of our discussion tonight.
I know. It's about marketing stuff.
This does not mean I am going to put something on top of one of these players to get to one of the other players that I see is almost the same as them. So, like, that dream to me, I don't see it as attainable.
Except that, like, me and you may not add, right? But, like, listeners listening, when they go out into their leagues, they're gonna find somebody to add, right? Well, the message is don't get too clingy on your Ayuk at 17 or 18 when you can get a plus on the guy who's your 28, right?
Sure, yeah. Like, Ayuk at 22 and Pittman at 33 are not so different to me. Like, I'm not trading one for the other because I don't know that one is going to have a better season than the other. It's pretty flat. Mm-hmm. It's an order because I have to make an order. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a matter of finding out who your league mates really like. So if you know somebody really likes somebody in that tier, then absolutely victimize them. But that's hard to know. You have to really know somebody. It's a lot of these leagues, it's just either casual friends or people you meet online. And if it's your best friend, then you're going to know how to exploit them.
Well, I think you can get a little intel on, say, for example, like what's the general market like? Like, look up things like Fantasy Calc and Dynasty Daddy and KTC and Fantasy Pros and Dynasty Trade Calculator. Look up what the general vibe is and then see if that's happening in your league. So, for example, right, like me and the general vibe like Christian Watson a lot more than you do. Right. Mm-hmm. So say I didn't know that, right? I might come knocking on your door and saying, I like Christian Watson. Jesse's got Christian Watson. Let me see what I can do here. And I might then say, offer you somebody who is in that neighborhood and see if I can get a plus, right? And the worst that you can do is tell me to go pound sand up the Rio Grande, or it could work.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'd be looking for a wide receiver that's actually put up numbers before. So, like, I have Pittman in that Christian Watson range, but I'd way rather have Pittman. In fact, I believe that is like the line of demarcation right there. That is a tier break at 33, Pittman. Because then below that, it's Elijah Moore, Christian Watson, George Pickens, Addison, Sutton, guys that I don't know or I don't know anything about really in the NFL or haven't seen. So, yeah,
So let me ask you.
That's tier break.
So let me ask you about a couple specific things. So in just I know KTC is KTC, but just for a point of reference, they've got Christian Watson at wide receiver 22, right? And they've got let's see, Quentin Johnson at wide receiver. Let's even better. Jordan Addison at wide receiver 17, right? Now, to me, 17? To me, that's bonkers.
It is bonkers.
It's bonkers for me to have Addison above Watson, and it's bonkers for me to have either of them. Well, not just either of them, but especially Addison that high, right? So say I go look at that on the website, right? And I say, oh, I got Addison. Ooh, like the community loves Addison. They got him up at 17. Let me go see if the Watson manager, will give me a little bit of plus. Shoot Jesse an offer, right? And I say Watson in a second for Addison or whatever, just to see if it works. There's going to be leagues where that could maybe happen, right? So like know what you feel about players, but also kind of know what the general market value is and see what you can exploit.
All right. So yes, I agree. But it's tough this time of year because there aren't a lot of things going on in leagues, right? There aren't a lot of trades going through not a lot of, a lot of leagues are completely dead. So I posted my rankings in the Dynasty Warzone Patreon chat as a courtesy, right?
You're a man of the people, doing them a favor.
Right. So we were chatting in like the content creators chat for DWZ, and one of the guys was asking for my rankings, and so I was like, hey, I'll give you my rankings, but I'm going to post them in the main chat because I want everybody to be able to see them because that's who I am. I'm an inclusive kind of guy. I love everybody, right? So I posted them, and I realized at the time this could lead to some unwanted offers, right? And sure enough, a guy that I really like and get along with very well with, I'm in a lot of leagues. He's like a very active member in DWZ, got very frustrated with me because he kept sending me these offers that I kept declining, but by my rankings, I should have been all over it, right? Mm-hmm. He sends me Christian Kirk, and I'm supposed to send him Jordan Addison. And I just turned him down flat, even though I have Kirk at around 20.
You have him, looks like you have him at 22.
21.
Okay.
And I've got Addison, like I said, at 38.
Right. Yeah.
So in his eyes, that's easy. Let's get this done. In my eyes, that doesn't mean I want to trade one for the other. It means I feel more confident having Christian Kirk on my team if I'm competing this year. But it doesn't mean I think he's going to be the better player going forward. I don't even know. I want to see Jordan Addison play football before I make that trade.
And that's interesting, right? Because you're kind of saying that you're leaning into 2023 in some of these rankings, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, definitely.
Which I kind of don't.
Well, it's it's really what lens do I look at it from, but
Yeah.
I struggle ranking rookies, and I told you that earlier in the year
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I haven't seen them play. So
Yeah.
it's hard for me to say that Jordan Addison is a better player than Christian Kirk because I've seen Christian Kirk be really good in the NFL. You know,
Also,
Addison, there are going to be busts this year that as soon as they come on the field are terrible or won't even get on the field. You know, Rager, QJ.
So I think it also, I think, speaks to for me personally. I know you are more okay with it than I am. I will almost never make a 1-for-1 same position trade.
It's hard for me to do too.
When you come to me and say, I'm going to give you player X and you're going to give me player Y, you're telling me you'd rather have player Y, which means, okay, then you should be adding to player X to get player Y. You know, like, and there's almost no way that, like, obviously, like, if somebody offers me like Breece Hall for, Anthony McFarland, like, I mean, obviously different story, right? But like something like you said right there, I almost never make straight up positional swaps like that. It's just something I just tend not to do, but that's, I think, the whole of the rabbit hole. So, another specific question for you, Michael Pittman. I'm leaning into loving Michael Pittman as a buy in the trade streets, not so much in startups. I think people are really buying into the side of the story that is AR is going to be bad for him. Rookie quarterback, mobile quarterback, AR still needs to develop as a passer, et cetera, right? And I get all that. But offenses that have a certain percentage of their pass attempts out of RPO, hyper concentrate their targets. They often have, and JJ Zachariason did this study, so just to credit him, they often have 2 or more guys with 20+% target share, right? And we were talking about this when you say who's going to run the best slant on the Colts, right? That's why I like Pittman, and to an extent Downs a lot more than I like Pierce, even though Pierce might look like he is better for AR's deep ball, which AR already does well, right? And I think in the trade streets, that's true. I think Pittman is a buy, but it's not showing up in startups where he's still wide receiver 22 going at the 509, right? So would you rather have Pittman at the 509, Pickens at the 607, or Ayuk at the 612?
Ayuk.
Right. And that's kind of what we're talking about tonight, right? Like, I technically have Pittman 1 rank above Ayuk, but if I can get Ayuk around plus later, I'm going to take Ayuk.
I just want the cheapest one. I'm moving Pittman up, by the way. I just moved Burks down like 3 spots.
Okay.
I realized I had him too high. I'm moving Pittman up from 33 to 29. Okay. Just below DJ Moore. And above Keenan Allen.
Do you have? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And also, you know what? Why am I so high on Hollywood? Why do I have him at 23?
I think I might.
It feels like I'm trying to prove a point. I'm not.
Take lock.
I'm moving him down to 20.
Little take lock for Jesse. Little live awakenings in your sticking to your priors. I have Hollywood. Let's see here. I have him. Where do I have him? I have him at 20.
That's where I just had him.
I think he's going to take a small dip early in the year when it's Colt McCoy or Clayton Tune or whatever. But in the end, he's young, he's talented. He's shown that he gets hyper targeted when he's on the field. So, I mean. But again, it's like, just because I have him 20 and Jahan Dotson 29th doesn't mean much. You know what I mean?
I'm keeping him in the same tier. I'm just moving him to the bottom of the tier instead of the top of the tier. That's all.
Right.
just because
So
it's a shitty offense. And I don't like the guys in shitty offenses as much, and he has nobody to take coverage away from him.
the Rondell Moore slander and Michael Wilson slander is
Justified.
I think Michael Wilson be interesting this year without D Hop there. Is
He's
there
a rookie. I mean, he could be good. He's
Yeah.
probably not going to be. Have we talked about this before? The can in your cupboard without the label on it.
the what now?
You know, the can in your cupboard
Mm-hmm.
without a label on it. This
Right.
is Michael Wilson.
Yeah.
Could be peaches, could be lunch meat.
Right. Hey, the mystery
Yeah, no
box
idea.
could be a boat too.
What's that?
The mystery box could be a boat too.
Yeah, exactly. Or it could be like a goat eating the can without the label.
Right. Is there a wide receiver or two or three in this sort of chunk of, generally flat tiers of wide receivers that you're identifying as a guy that's a buy that you're going after this offseason? Or are you just like, hey, it's the offseason, there's not enough data or info to make moves on? Is there anybody that because I think for me personally, I'll say it's